You are listening to That's Life, a One Love Media production.
Hey everyone, welcome back to That's Life. Sometimes the biggest obstacle in our way is us. We have goals, dreams, plans, but for some reason we keep tripping over ourselves. Why do we do this? More importantly, how do we break free of it? Today, we're diving in to the subject of self-sabotage. What it is, why it happens, and how to finally stop working against ourselves. And I'm not doing this episode alone. I just had an incredible conversation with Dr. Laura Ellick, a clinical psychologist who specializes in helping people break through destructive patterns and take control of their lives. Let me tell you, this interview is one you are not going to want to miss. But before we get into that, let's talk about how society deals with self-sabotage. Because, boy, do we have a lot to unpack. All right, let's talk about how society plays into our self-sabotage. Because if you think about it, we are set up to fail in the most ridiculous ways. First off, we live in a world where we are constantly encouraged to improve ourselves, but not too much. Society's got rules, people. You can work on yourself, but don't get too confident or you're full of yourself. Stay humble, but not too humble, or now you're insecure. And don't even get me started on diet culture. We're told to love our bodies, but also, here's a new detox tea that will ruin your insides in 3 to 5 business days. We should be confident, but only after we fix everything we've been told is wrong with us. Make it make sense. Then we've got procrastination culture. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. How many of us have put off doing something important just to scroll the abyss of TikTok for 3 hours? Meanwhile, your to-do list is in the corner, silently judging you. And the worst part, we know we're doing it. We'll be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling like, man, I should really get up and handle my life right now. But do we? Nope. Instead, we Google things like, why am I like this? And then continue to do nothing. And let's talk about relationships, because this one is brutal. Trust me. We say we want love, we say we want a healthy relationship, but the second we meet someone actually good for us, our brain goes, you know what would be fun? Ruining this. Full send, brother. And for what? Some of us are out here turning down emotionally available partners like, ew, why do you like me? That's suspicious. And listen, workplace sabotage, that's a whole different beast. We'll complain about needing a raise, but then when our boss asks if we can take on a new project, we're like, you know what? I think I'll just sit here in silence and hope they read my mind instead. Or worse, We finally get an opportunity and our imposter syndrome kicks in like, wow, I can't believe they fell for it. They think I know what I'm doing. Fools. The truth is, we are constantly being fed mixed messages. Be ambitious, but not too ambitious. Work hard, but don't forget self-care. But also, if you rest too much, you're lazy. Be confident, but not arrogant. Pick a struggle, society. Self-sabotage isn't just a personal issue. It is a cultural epidemic. We're trained to doubt ourselves, to fear success, and to second guess every decision. But the good news? Once we see it for what it is, we can finally start rewriting the script. And that is where the real work begins. Let's be real. Self-sabotage isn't new. People have been getting in their own way since the beginning of time. In the Bible, it's full of stories of people who struggled with doubt, fear, and destructive habits. Let's look at Moses. God literally spoke to him through a burning bush and told him he was chosen to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And what did Moses do? He said, "Who am I that I should go?" Even with divine proof, he doubted himself and almost walked away from his calling. Or look at Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, the same man who boldly declared he would never deny Jesus, denied him 3 times in one night. Not because he didn't love Jesus, but because fear took over. Sound familiar? The Bible is full of these stories of people second guessing themselves, doubting themselves, trying to sabotage their own success, from Peter to Moses to Jonah. The whole reason he was in a whale was because he was trying to get out of what God was wanting him to do. But self-sabotage often comes from fear and doubt and unhealed wounds. It's when God is trying to move us forward, but our minds keep pulling us back. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 remind us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all ways, submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. That means trusting that you are worthy, that you are capable, and that you are called for something greater, even if your mind tries to tell you otherwise. Because if God has opened a door for you, self-sabotage is just the enemy trying to keep you from walking through it. We've all been there, standing in our own way, holding ourselves back, and then wondering why things aren't changing. Self-sabotage is one of the most frustrating and confusing patterns we fall into. But why do we do it? And more importantly, how do we break free? Today, we're diving in deep to this topic with an expert who has dedicated her career to helping individuals overcome such challenges. Dr. Laura Ellick is a licensed psychologist practicing in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, with over 20 years of experience. She holds licenses in New York, Florida, and Virginia, and also possesses the PsyPact, is that correct?
That's correct.
Telehealth license, allowing her to provide services across 40 participating states. Dr. Ellick specializes in treating eating disorders, anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and chronic medical conditions. Her diverse clientele includes high net worth executives, entertainers, as well as children's, teens, and adults from various backgrounds. Beyond her clinical work, Dr. Ellick is an accomplished author, speaker, and host of the Slightly Sane podcast, where she shares insights on mental health and wellness. Dr. Ellick, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Well, like I said before we started, this is really, really personal for me. And obviously, with the introduction I did, you can see how excited I am to have you. It's really a joy for me.
So let's get into it. What do we want to know?
All right. Well, first off, can you explain what self-sabotage is and how do we recognize when we're doing it?
Ooh, that is like the number one question, right? Well, I mean, self-sabotage really is a process where it looks like we are going along the path that we're telling everybody that we want to go on. And then all of a sudden, there's an apparent roadblock, and
Right.
then progress stops. And so, a lot of times it's not a conscious process. It's not like I only want to make $30,000 a year and then I want to stop, right? Like nobody actually says or wants to do that, but
Right.
there are things from our background and ways that maybe we've been programmed as children where we get to that particular limit, and then it's almost like there's something that's actually blocking you from going any further. And that's where, people like me come in to help you kind of figure out, hey, what's going on and what's keeping you in that place, because there's no reason why you shouldn't go above and beyond what you thought you were capable of.
Right. Absolutely. I completely agree. So, are there different types of self-sabotage, or does it usually stem from the same core issues?
I think for the most part, when we're looking at self-sabotage, we're looking at a couple different things. I mean, we have to go back in a lot of ways to how you were raised as a kid. So we pick up a lot of messages from our families, our caregivers, our friends, teachers, whatever, that we kind of internalize, whether it's things that were verbally said to us, like, this is a family where, we're not millionaires. That's for other people. That's not us. Or we're blue collar people. Nobody becomes doctors in our family. So you have things that are verbally said, but then there are other things that you may just observe. So you may observe a parent, for example, who has a possibility of getting a raise or switching jobs, and they back down and decide not to pursue it. And so we learn that maybe we're actually limited by what people have told us or what we've seen in the past. And of course, the biggest reason that we have a tendency to self-sabotage is fear of success, fear of failure. That runs deep within us. So we really have to look at some of those early messages that we got and try to reprogram them and unblock you.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned fear, because my next question has to do with that. And how do fear and self-sabotage play a role in keeping people stuck in these patterns?
Listen, fear is a powerful motivator, unfortunately. So we often have a fear of, what if I try this and I fail? Now I have to tell people that I failed. And there's that shame aspect to it. Or, there's also fear as in, what if I do get what I want? And what if I'm the first one in my family who wants to be a doctor and is actually going to pursue that? What are people going to think about me that I'm actually breaking with tradition? So it kind of goes both ways, right? We can fear being successful and we can fear failure as well. And a lot of times it has to do with what other people are going to be thinking of us one
Right.
way or another. And that you got to get rid of that, because the only person that you have to be accountable to is the person who you're looking at in the mirror every morning.
Absolutely. And I've said it before, and I've talked about it on episodes, is that the only person that you have to impress is you. You have
Right.
to past thinking that, this person over here that knew you in high school should opinion should matter of what you're doing now, because I have, I feel that way, is that it's really really easy to blame other things instead of looking towards yourself when it comes to trying to fix what's wrong in your life.
Absolutely. That's number one point. Absolutely.
So, do you think, or not think, but in your professional opinion, is self sabotage always linked to past trauma, or can it develop from other factors?
I think it can develop, not only from our past experiences from like early past, but I think also from failure experiences that we have, like present time. So for example, if you put yourself out there with a girl or a guy and you're really being vulnerable and you get burned, right? Burned badly. It
Yeah.
may not necessarily be a trauma, but it's going to be something that may make you think twice about putting yourself out there again. And I've seen it, because I do a lot of dating and relationship work. I see people who have gotten so burned that they've just given up. And if somebody even tries to approach them, they shut it down. And of course, you're self-sabotaging the possibility of having some kind of happiness that maybe this person could be different.
Right.
So we're always learning and taking in information from everything that goes on, past and present.
Had you known me in high school, something like that happened to me, it definitely probably would have been a trauma.
Absolutely. I feel you. It's not, for a lot of people, it's not considered like a big T trauma, but is it like a little T trauma? Absolutely. And if you have enough of those, you get rejected enough, there is going to be like this part where it's like, I just can't put myself out there again. I can't tolerate it. And my message to people is, yes, you can, because you have been tolerating it all of this time. You just think you're not.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. So, do you think at some point people who self-sabotage, do you think it becomes like second nature to where they don't even realize they're doing it anymore, or do you
Oh,
think
yeah.
it's still in the back of their head?
Absolutely. I think there may be some sort of question like, why did I do that? Right? This is what I say I want. Why did I do that? But it takes some time and maybe someone even pointing out to you this pattern before you might notice and be like, shoot, whenever I get to a third date with someone, I, ghost. And it's really because I'm afraid of vulnerability. Or, every time my boss wants to promote me, I start calling in sick a lot. What's that about? So it does take a little bit of stepping outside yourself and observing. And I've talked about this on Slightly Sane and also my new podcast, which is called From Mayhem to Mindset with Dr. Laura. I grew up in a very fear-based household, right? So all of that programming I had. And at a certain age, I kind of recognized it. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do the opposite. So
Right.
anytime I noticed that I had fear, I forced myself to do the thing that I was afraid of.
And that's what you have to do. I did an episode just recently about self-sabotage, kind of like self-sabotage, but not like that. And I pretty much said the same thing. I feel like people do get stuck in a loop of hurting themselves or not advancing and not realizing it. And a part of me starting That's Life was because I've done it myself, and I finally realized that I was doing it and I started changing it. And then after I started changing it, I was like, holy crap, I can do this on my own. If I can do this on my own, other people like me need to know that they can do it too. And, so yeah, that's
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is possible. And I tell people, just for a cultural reference, when people are like, where do I start? I always give the example for people who are Seinfeld fans. I tell them, look, we're just going to do like what I call the George Costanza effect. So, for people who aren't familiar with Seinfeld, George Costanza was like the lovable loser on Seinfeld. Like, he just could not get anything right. And when he just decided, like on a whim, to all of a sudden just do the opposite of everything that he was doing, that's when he actually started having success. He got a great job with the Yankees, he got the girl, all of those things. So I tell people, look, even if just for a day, you can like act the George Costanza effect and just do the opposite, see what happens. Just try it.
Yeah, and if you didn't get the Seinfeld reference, then you should really change that because Seinfeld is amazing.
Right. And that's a great episode.
Yeah, it is.
Series of
So,
episodes. But I mean, it's just amazing where he has this realization. Everything, I'm just doing the opposite and I'm scoring big.
yeah, exactly. So, what role does therapy or coaching play in overcoming self-sabotage?
I think a lot of times when we're in our head too much, it's really difficult for us to step outside ourselves and really look at the patterns. But when you are there with a coach or with a therapist and you're kind of talking it out and highlighting several different instances or telling your story, a good coach or therapist will be able to say, hey, I'm not sure you noticed, but do you realize the last 3 times you went out with a person, it went to 3 dates and then you cut it off? What's that about? And
Right.
so they're going to be skilled at helping you understand what the pattern is and then going underneath and digging deep into what is that about.
That's amazing. Actually, it really is. How can people build self-trust and confidence so they don't fall back into old habits?
I think people are way more resilient than they give themselves credit for. So, as I was saying previously, when people will say things like, I can't stand it anymore, I can't tolerate it. If, I get fired from another job, or if I get dumped by this person again, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I'll say to them, you have been doing it. You just don't realize that you have been surviving and pushing through every single failure instance that you've had. So I think helping people recognize that they're already resilient and that it takes time to build new patterns, but every time they're resisting the urge to give into the fear, they're kind of rewiring their brain in a different way.
Absolutely. So, as a psychologist, you know that people, and not a majority, but there are a good amount of people who have this mistrust towards therapy, therapists, counseling, and stuff like that. Have you found it easier for people to connect with their therapist with the new telehealth thing?
People have been asking me that question. And I have to say, in all honesty, when telehealth first came out during COVID, I was like, no, it's going to destroy our field. Like, therapy has to be in person. But one of the things that I really noticed, which I thought was a positive, was people stuck around in therapy longer. We've removed the obstacles for them to get to the office, picking up the kids at school or homework or being homesick. So the compliance rate definitely went up. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is it really helped connection with teenagers and young adults. So I noticed that teenagers especially wanted to show me their bedroom, wanted to show me their house, wanted to show me their dog, wanted to show me, look, this is the dress that I was talking to you about that I wore to prom. Or what do you think of this dress that I'm wearing to the dance? It actually wound up building connection in an entirely different way that I never expected. And of course, with the telehealth and with the SIPAC license, it gives us access to reach people in over 40 states, people who may not have access to mental health services otherwise. So I don't see a particular downside at this point, a significant downside.
Yeah, and I know from experience because I've used the telehealth app and well, I believe it was a version of that for therapy, and I've also done the in-person therapy. And I felt more comfortable with telehealth. And I really think a majority of that mental state is because of your mental, like you feel judged when you walk into a psychologist's office, and then you have to sit down in a room that is looks like it's made to feel or make you feel comfortable, but you don't feel comfortable in it.
Right.
While telehealth, I can sit in my chair and feel comfortable. That's actually what I did. I sat in my chair in my pajamas, and I talked with my therapist through my laptop, and
Right.
I felt more weight off my shoulders with one visit from them than when I ever did walking into a therapist's office.
It can be really, really uncomfortable. Now, there are some people for whom telehealth just may not work, right? Like we know that, we understand that. But I found that for the majority of people for whom telehealth, is indicated, they do really well with it.
Right. So my last question is, do you have any advice for listeners who feel stuck in this cycle and don't know where to start?
That's a great one. I would start with number one, identifying where you want to be. And instead of looking at the steps forward to get there, work backwards. So if your ultimate goal is to, I'm just going to throw something out there, make $1 million, go backwards. What would life
Right.
look like if I had $1 million? Well, I probably would be doing this, then I would be doing this, then I would be doing this. So I like sometimes having people work backwards because it uses a different area of the brain. We're so used to being goal oriented, A, B, C, D. Let's work backwards and see, for this to be true, what would have had to come before that? And then what would have had to come before that? So giving someone a different kind of perspective can be pretty helpful. And then also talking it out. Even if you're talking to yourself out loud, I find that when you say things out loud, it stimulates a different area of the brain and you get that objective third party. So if you say, I think I'm sabotaging myself, gee, this is the third time I've gone out with a guy and I have this urge to ghost them. Well, now you're looking at it from a different perspective. So those are like some quick tips that people can use. But ultimately, it's about finding someone to work with who can help you get unblocked. And it's not like a long-term thing. I'm not a long-term therapist or coach. A good coach or a good therapist is going to want to help you get unblocked and then move you on.
Right. Absolutely. That is some of the best advice, that way better advice than I could have ever given. Dr. Ellick, this conversation has been absolutely amazing, eye-opening, and I know so many people listening needed to hear this today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and helping us understand how to break free from the cycle of self-sabotage. Before we get out of here, is there anything else you'd like to say? Tell us where, or tell my listeners where they can find you at, all that.
Sure. So everyone can reach out to me at www.lauraellick.com. I do therapy and I do coaching. And don't forget to listen to my new podcast, From Mayhem to Mindset, with Dr. Laura on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And don't forget to give us a like. And it's just been amazing to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Ellick, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. That conversation with Dr. Ellick? Wow. There's so many takeaways. But here's a few that really stuck. Number one, self-sabotage isn't about laziness or lack of ability. It's about fear. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of stepping out into the unknown. Number two, the way that we speak to ourselves matters. If you wouldn't say it to a friend, don't say it to yourself. Number three, breaking free starts with awareness. Once you recognize the pattern, you can start to change it. And listen, if you struggle with this, you're not alone. But you can change. You can step into everything God has planned for you. It starts with a decision to stop holding yourself back. Next week, we're talking about something a lot of people struggle with: the importance of vulnerability, why we fear it, why we need it, and how being open can change everything. Until next time, do you, but do it with love and affection. I'm Kyle Fields, and that's life.
That's Life is hosted by Kyle Fields and written by Mary Rodriguez. Editing and production by One Love Media. All rights reserved. Like what you heard? Join the conversation. Follow us on social media and be part of the That's Life community. Want exclusive content? That's Life Members Lounge is now available for just $5 a month on Patreon. Get access to special episodes, expert interviews, and even request topics for future shows. Sign up at patreon.com/OneLoveFLA. And don't forget to check out our other shows. The Survivors series, new episodes every Wednesday. Sunday Evening Reset, a powerful way to end your weekend, streaming every Sunday night. See you next week for another episode of That's Life.